Most people think the secret to a happy retirement is having enough money. And look, I get it. You've been told that for 30 years. Max out your 401k, hit your number, and then freedom. But here's what nobody puts in the brochure. Harvard ran a study, 90 years. Same people tracked from teenagers to old age. And when those people hit retirement age, something wild happened. The population split, clean down the middle, half of them got happier. The other half fell apart, health declining, relationships evaporating, sense of purpose just gone. And here's the kicker that should bother you. The money didn't predict which group you ended up in, not reliably. So what did? That is exactly what we're going to break down today. 8 habits backed by 90 years of Harvard data and the work of Dr. George Vaillant and more recently Arthur Brooks that separate the people who genuinely thrive in retirement from the ones who just exist in it. And I'm going to connect these habits to how you should actually be thinking about building wealth, because it turns out the same psychology that wrecks your retirement lifestyle is the same psychology that wrecks your portfolio. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most of the ones online are mathematically broken. They use assumptions that Vanguard and BlackRock's own research would laugh at. Link is in the description. I only ask for your email to send the report. I don't store your financial data. Now, here's the central metaphor I want you to hold on to for this entire video. Think of your retirement as a portfolio, not just a financial portfolio, a life portfolio. And just like a real portfolio, it's not enough to pour everything into one asset class and hope for the best. The people who retire into misery, they over-indexed. One asset, usually work, or money, or status, and when that asset went to zero on their last day of employment, their entire net worth, their entire sense of self collapsed. A diversified life portfolio has multiple holdings. That's the game. And these 8 habits are your asset classes. The first habit is active coping. And I want to be careful here because this sounds soft, but the data on this is actually brutal. Older adults don't have fewer problems, they have more. Health scares, loss of friends and spouses, identity crises after leaving careers. The research doesn't show that happy retirees avoid hard things. It shows they've developed a skill, a literal practice skill at processing hard things. Some through therapy, some through meditation, some through journaling, prayer, long walks where they talk to themselves. The key word the researchers used was skilled. They're good at it because they practiced. It's not a personality trait, it's a trained behavior. Think about it like rebalancing a portfolio. Most people don't do it consistently, so when the market shifts, they panic sell. The people who've practiced their coping mechanism regularly, they rebalance. They don't spiral. They adjust and keep moving. One simple entry point, and I've heard this from a lot of people, just write down 3 small wins at the end of every day. Not achievements, wins. I had a good cup of coffee outside this morning. That's a win. You're training your brain to notice what's working, not just what's broken. Now here's where it starts getting interesting. Habit 2 is to keep learning. And this one actually surprised me when I first read the research. People who stop learning in early adulthood are measurably more likely to end up in the sad and sick category in later life. That's a direct finding from the study. Not probably worse off, measurably worse. But here's the flip side interest. Genuine curiosity about something new is classified as a basic positive emotion by psychologists. We are wired to feel good when we learn. It's not a nice to have, it's biochemical. And for anyone in the 55 plus range, here's the irony. Your generation has more access to learning than any humans who have ever lived. YouTube, audiobooks, online courses, podcasts. Your parents would have had to drive to a university library. You can learn Mandarin or medieval history or how options pricing works before breakfast. The people thriving in retirement aren't doing it to impress anyone. They're doing it because it makes them feel more alive. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. Now you're asking yourself, okay, but what's the most important one? And the answer is habit 3. When Dr. Vaillant was asked to summarize 90 years of data in a sentence, he said, happiness is love, full stop. So the habit is prioritize love relationships, not networking. Not deal friends, the transactional kind, the work contacts and the golf buddies who are really just business relationships wearing a casual shirt, real friends, the ones who know the worst thing about you and are still there. Arthur Brooks distinguishes between deal friends and real friends, and the research is unambiguous if you arrive at 70 without one of 2 things, either a stable and genuinely happy long-term marriage or deep, real friendships. Your odds of being in the happy group drop significantly. And here's what makes this uncomfortable. You can't build those relationships at 70. You build them now. This is not a retirement problem. This is a right now problem. This is where the portfolio metaphor gets really sharp. Neglecting your relationship capital is like neglecting to contribute to your investment account for 30 years and then wondering why compound interest didn't work for you. The growth happens slowly, invisibly over decades, and then suddenly it's everything. Imagine a guy, let's call him David, 58 years old, senior vice president at a logistics company, retired comfortably with $2.4 million in investments. By any financial measure, he nailed it. But David had spent 25 years building deal friendships, work dinners, client relationships, people who respected him because of what he could do for them. He retired. The dinner stopped, the calls stopped. 18 months in, David described his life as waiting. He had the portfolio, he didn't have the life portfolio. David is not unusual. He's the median story. The financial planning worked, everything else was underfunded. Habit 4 is don't smoke. I know, you know this one. But let me reframe it because the statistic that should stick is not the mortality rate, it's the Healthspan data. If you're a lifelong smoker, you have roughly a 70% chance of dying from a smoking-related illness. But more relevant to this conversation is that smoking-related illness doesn't just shorten your life, it destroys the years before the end. The gap between lifespan and health span, meaning healthy, functional, high-quality years, that gap gets wider and wider. You might hit your number, you might retire at 62, and then spend a decade managing chronic illness instead of living. The financial plan was solid, the physiological asset was destroyed. Habit 5, and this one is going to step on some toes, is be intentional about alcohol. The Harvard study found that the people in the happy and well category in their 70s and 80s weren't necessarily abstinent, but they were conscious. The question the researchers essentially posed is, are you using this to enhance your life or to escape from it? And I've heard versions of this from enough people over the years that it's clearly a real pattern. Retirement hits, the structure disappears, boredom arrives before purpose does, and alcohol starts creeping earlier into the day. Nobody's alarmed at first, it's gradual. But the people in the thriving group had noticed this pattern and corrected it before it compounded. I just have one glass with dinner. Sure, buddy. And I just check my phone once in the morning. Habit 6 is diet. But not in the way you're thinking. The research isn't showing that the happiest older adults look like they did at 30. The data shows they maintain a stable, healthy weight without yo-yo dieting. Consistency, not perfection. The yo-yo pattern cycles of restriction and binging appears to be more damaging long-term than a steady, slightly imperfect diet. Same principle as volatile investment behavior. The person who earns 8% consistently beats the person who swings between up 30 and down 25. Volatility kills returns in investing and, apparently, in body weight. Habit 7 is movement, and the researchers found it doesn't need to be intense. The simplest and most accessible form for older adults is walking, 30 minutes a day. That's the intervention that showed up consistently in the data. One of the most compelling versions of this I've heard is someone who turned their morning walk into thinking time. They'd process the day ahead, work through a problem, sometimes just notice things. The physical act and the mental act running in parallel. And movement becomes foundational to everything else. Sleep quality, mood regulation, cognitive function. It's not about aesthetics. It's about system maintenance. Now, here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because Arthur Brooks added an 8th habit that wasn't in the original Harvard data. And I'd argue it's the one most people in their 50s are least prepared for. It's prioritizing a spiritual or philosophical life, and before you click off, hear me out, because this isn't about religion. What Brooks found is that retirement often triggers an identity crisis because for decades, your answer to who are you was your job title, and then suddenly that's gone. And if you don't have an answer to what makes life worth living beyond my own comfort, you are going to drift, full stop. The people who thrive have something bigger than themselves. For some, it's faith. For others, it's philosophy, a framework for what a good life looks like. For others, it's a legacy question. What am I leaving behind? Who am I serving? What does my contribution look like? This becomes the North Star when everything else gets hard. And in your 70s and 80s, things will get hard. Here are 3 things you should actually do, not because they sound good in a video, but because the data supports them specifically. 1, audit your relationship portfolio right now. Count your real friends, not deal friends. If the number is below 2, that is a financial emergency disguised as a social one. Start compounding. 2, pick one thing to learn that has 0 professional value to you. No ROI calculation allowed. Something you're just genuinely curious about. That emotional return compounds too, and it doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. 3, take the physical asset seriously before you need to, because fixing chronic health problems in retirement with money is expensive, exhausting, and frequently impossible. Most retirement plans are one asset portfolios, all money, no life. And I've seen it enough times that the pattern is basically a law. The people who built the full portfolio, relationships, purpose, health, coping skills, curiosity, they're the ones who look at retirement and say, this is everything I worked for. The people who didn't have to get by on money alone. And money is a lot of things, but it is a genuinely terrible substitute for a life. Don't work for money. Own the companies that do. And build the rest of it too, because the S&P 500 doesn't care if you die bored and alone.